So one of the things Keith said right away is we're going to present some research, so I'm not. Instead, I'm going to talk about it's industry-led and cooperation with government on how to actually deal with the mountain pine beetle infestations at a regional level, and specifically on the analysis and support that goes behind that. So just sort of a quick overview. First will be the analysis that was undertaken. That resulted in the construction of a model. And from that, there's been some, I'm going to present some general observations that have come out of the three regions in the province that have undertaken this analysis. And the last part is sort of closing the planning loop. So in other words, we've made some predictions. Well, are they any good? Right? How close are we? Because we want to try to improve that through time. So when this started, industry came forth and they said, you know, we've got a couple of big questions. Hey, we know the beetles are coming here. We know, matter of fact, we know they're already here. We know how much pine we have. We know basically what our allowable cuts are going to do. What we don't know is how long we have. Is that stand going to be gone in 3 years, 10 years? What's going to be the impacts of the infestation that we currently have and as it rolls out across the landscape? What action should be undertaken to reduce these impacts? What are the costs and benefits of doing so? And this was all also a desire to have some supporting analysis to help make some decisions. I mean, understand decisions were happening. They were happening even without any of this analysis and will continue to happen. But let's try to put some rigor behind it to give some confidence in the decisions that were being made. So this support analysis, this isn't sort of the normal way one would go if one was setting up a nice research project or deliberately set out to build analytical decision support tools. It was done originally under incredibly compressed timelines. I think from the initial phone call, we might want your help, until the analysis was completed was 2 months. That might seem like a long or short term. It was a lot, and I know a lot of things changed during that period of time. Because of the compressed timelines, it meant there was no time for new information. It had to be existing information that was already readily available. Using that, although we didn't set out to do so, we constructed a model really to support the decisions. So in order to do that, there was a team approach. The mountain pine beetle expertise, I'm a forester, I know almost nothing about mountain pine beetle, came from mostly from Alberta, Dan Lux's shop, and some of the CFS researchers. The harvesting expertise and information came directly from the forest industry, and the Forestry Corp provided some analytical expertise. So this is typical of the situation that's faced in dealing with forestry problems. This is a multidiscipline problem. Specifically, when you really look at the people that are used to dealing with mountain pine beetle and used to dealing with infestations in the forest industry, bringing them together in a lot of information exchange and really working cooperatively together. And I really want to stress that there was a tremendous amount of, and still is a tremendous amount of cooperation in getting this to go. And this particular project has been funded under the Freedom Mountain Pine Beetle program. So, a little bit about the modeling that we undertook. First, it's nothing to do with the life cycle of the beetle. So, what did we do? Well, again, this is a landscape scale because this was a regional problem, so this is 10 forest product companies getting together at the original start in the central region. The tool that ended up being built is spatial at a stand level scale. Foresters operate at stand level. The base data drives is almost always related back to stand level. Annual steps for 20 years. 20 years came because when we put it all together, 10 years wasn't enough to deal with the problem. The original problem was, this is not a timber supply. We're not worried about that. We're worried about what to do in the short term So how long does that take to make short-term decisions? What time horizon should I look under? The original thinking was 10 years, but we found out that with the estimated number of beetles, that 10 years was not enough to deal with the problem. So the tool we ended up building tracks individual pine trees. It's built upon work that was completed, I think, just several months before from SRD in response to similar questions in Grand Prairie. Basically, we identify where the infested trees are. It's really quite simple. We predict new infested trees using red-green ratios and SSI. Once we know or estimate what the predicted new trees are, we simply distribute them up to 1 kilometer. And if you think there's going to be an in-flight, you just add them. So it's really quite simple. It's the dynamics and the whole, it's really more of an accounting exercise. It's not a research. We use existing information, existing relationships. So we're not coming along and predicting this is how fast we think the beetle potential growth rates are and spread rates are. We're just putting it together and rolling it out in the landscape. So I said we have a pine tree tracking model. Basically, we start with all the pine in the region. This is where all the trees are. On each polygon, we track the gray pine trees that are both merchantable and non-merchantable. So if they're beyond your merchantability window, in other words, they've decayed too far. We track the red pine trees, how many there are, the green attack trees, the pine trees that are yet to be attacked, also the pine tree size for the stand, the other conifer volume that's present, and deciduous volume. When we originally started this in the central region, there's more pine volume and even more infested pine volume than the companies could cut in the next period of time. So we weren't worried about how do we really deal with the integration of pine species and other species across the landscape from an AEC perspective. How does that balance have to happen? Simply because there's so much pine you can't possibly cut it all. So we only focused on the pine component and really ignored most of the rest. Conceptually, the tool works quite simply. Don't blind anybody here. So just starting on the inside, again, it's a large accounting tool. We start with the managed land base. And so the managed land base comes from companies' timber supply land bases where they've already identified stands that are operable, areas they won't harvest in, the strata and volumes are already tagged there. Level 2 harvest action in this case simply means harvesting infested stands. It simply ranks all the infested stands that are infested, non-infested, ranks them according to the types of stands I would like to cut, harvest them up to the limit. And you may have a limit that says, I don't want to chase mountain pine beetle all over the FMA. I can only do that to a certain percent, so you can set a percent and say, the rest I want to go clear cut. The next thing it does is it loops through and spreads beetles, and it spreads the mountain pine beetle on, of course, the entire land base, not just the managed land base where harvesting may happen. So if there's a level 1 action, implement that level 1 action, in other words, single tree control up to the limits. If there's an in-flight, add the in-flight and spread the mountain pine beetle. And it does that every year through the entire land base, which is hundreds of thousands of polygons. Then it loops through whatever your sustained yield units or FMAs are for your harvest levels, and up to 20 years. So I said it runs on timber supply land bases or AVI files, and using these means, of course, we've already picked up operational information. Stand and stock tables. When we started in the central region, we were extremely fortunate because most of the companies had collaborated on building a common stand and stock tables which applied to the region, so there was a readily available data set. So this is where the number of pine trees and the size of pine trees is where the data comes from. Mountain pine beetle stand susceptibility index and conductivity information, red-green ratios, and other information actually from SRD's Mountain Pine Beetle Decision Support System. The key piece is, where are the infested trees? Where's the gray attack trees? Where's the current year's red attack trees? And where are the green attack trees? If you don't know this, you really can't make any predictions on where to go and where I should harvest, where level 1 control should happen, and what the potential spread and rollout might be. The tool itself requires you to put a couple of assumptions in. Mountain pine beetle growth and distribution rates. You simply put them in. When we started with the central region, the rates moved around a bit, trying to see what balance came from, and I remember Erica Lee giving some advice back and forth a couple of times with different numbers just to see which would, what were the right levels. I think under the highest SSI we have levels that approach our annual growth rate of approximately 3, but that's what the model's capable of. When it spreads it out across the land base, it's actually less than that. In-flights, we experimented with different levels of in-flights and different in-flights and different distributions of them, and they make every different. They make, of course, if you put none in, they don't make any difference at all. If you put huge ones in, well, you don't even need to do any analysis. Planned activities, whether they harvest plans, harvest levels, the percent harvest that would should come from infested stands as a target. Shelf life, how long after the tree is infested is it still merchantable? Again, sorting rules are, from a harvesting perspective, which types of timber would I desire to harvest first? And zones, so any zonation that, whether they be caribou zones or harvesting or level 1 zones, where should that happen across the landscape? And of course, if you have any level 1 rules, the level 1 rules that I think were settled on the central region is still largely used, or about, level 1 is about 85% effective, and you can only apply it in stands that have between 3 and 60 trees, although I know that was also changed for in Grand Prairie. The tool is actually accessible online. This was one of the desires. So there's an online interface where the data sets are uploaded. Won't go into it here. I can actually show you that later. And the particular scenarios are input. The server runs a rate, crunches everything, sends you an email, and you can go download the results. And there's some basic default results also come out of the online information, the online tool. So, a couple of big findings. This is the central region. I asked the question, how well do we do? Do we get any better? So this is 3 different years, 2009 data, 2010, and 2011 survey data. When we started in 2009, this is the prediction of new red trees annually without any harvesting or single tree control. This is just what's the growth potential, and there's also no in-flights in this. So of the existing population, there's a couple of things to note here. When we originally started, there's a slight but long decrease in the new trees that are generated each year. The other piece is it starts way up here at about 3.5 million trees. Each year, you're generating another 3.5 million new trees. In 2010, not only does the pattern look fundamentally different, but the starting has gone from 3.5 way down to several 100,000. This is one of the big, this is one of the big killing years where the winter and the summer was not very kind to mountain pine beetle growth. And it also reflects differences in initial starting conditions as we loaded it into the prediction tools, and I'll go on to that later. So the uncertainty that you have around here is going to have a big impact on how long you have before the beetle consumes the resource. The other thing that changed is after experience of the first year, when the predictions based on largely SSI rates was we had this nice cold winter. That was deemed a killing year, so every 6 years, to pull a number out of the air, a killing year comes along and applies the death rate observed in that 1 year from the central region, and we've actually applied that to other regions since then. Why 6 years into the future? Why not? We ran different ones. If it happens next year, you know it's going to collapse quicker. So this really begins to show some of the impacts of just the assumptions on how fast the beetle can potentially spread and what could potentially happen. So that's why that one collapses. In 2011, the numbers are even lower and the spread potential is less. Here's a comparison between regions. The 2010 survey data, that was from the previous graph. This is the central region. So this is 2011. This is, again, no harvest, no control in the central region. So it's 2011 data. That's the same one you just saw previously. But to that, we've added two new region information. One is the Grand Prairie region. So the Grand Prairie region, again, starting with sort of a similar number of beetles, shows a slightly different pattern. The killing relationship is, again, from that bad year, bad for mountain pine beetle populations. That's simply applied, then it results in that reduction, and the beetle sort of never recovers. But you still see that it takes over 20 years, you're still going to have beetle potentially spreading. The really interesting run is the Northwest region. So starting from a number, again, that's still under 1 million, it absolutely explodes in a very short period of time, peaks at about 3 or 4 years, and collapse. So the biggest growth in new trees in the three regions between the central, the Grand Prairie, and the Northwest region is actually in the Northwest. The other thing that happens is it doesn't collapse as quickly because the killing year data from there wasn't as harsh as other regions. So what if I put some control on this? So we can start with the Northwest. There was the Northwest. That's the potential that's there. If the company's harvest plans are implemented and there is a level 1 program, I couldn't actually remember the number, but it's a very aggressive level 1 program is put in place. You can knock that down. So the difference between these two lines is the reduction in the number of new trees. And really what you notice on the Northwest is you've got about 6 years if you harvest and did a really aggressive level 1 and your beetle population won't spread anymore. It doesn't mean there's still not pine trees left. If you don't, you have about twice as long. Grand Prairie region, you can see the same thing. The scenarios are basically the same. So following the planned harvest, what happens? There's the potential if you put the harvesting in place. And again, these are surge cuts too. These are mountain pine beetle surge cuts designed to go after and manage mountain pine beetle. So this is not company operations as normal. These are plans that were put in place deliberately to manage it. With a level 1 program, again, the beetle can be brought under control. And in the central region, you see the same general pattern. So this is a very aggressive harvesting at a high level. These are approved surge cuts and an aggressive level 1. You really can bring the beetle under control unless we get an in-flight. So overall, what kind of dynamics? Harvesting and single tree control can have generally similar type of impacts on reducing potential mountain pine beetle spreads and impacts. But by far the impact is greatest when you team the two together, when they're combined. If you only put a year or two of control in or a year or two of targeting infested stands, it doesn't make much difference. You have to keep at it and keep at it. It really takes a sustained effort. When the populations are small, you can really do something. When the populations are big, oh, too bad, it just eats it all. The other piece that's come out of this, it is difficult operationally to integrate mountain pine beetle control and harvest planning timelines. The two just don't sync very well. Forest planning has been developed under relatively consistent assumptions. The past is an indication of the future. We have processes around that. They're there for a lot of good reasons. But when you're trying to chase mountain pine beetle, they don't work very well necessarily. The last piece is, you notice the difference in starting information. If you don't know where the green trees are, you really can't do anything about managing how to go get them and control them. So a couple of products that's come out of this. To answer one of the first questions, how long do we have? One of the things we produced is a year to death map. So over the next 5 years, where are the stands that are going to die? And similarly, over the next 5 years, show me where all the volume is that's going to die. Those ones help plan operations. If you knowing that information, foresters can then make some decision. Maybe I'll go over here or not over here. One of the other questions was, should I chase the beetle? And how much level 1 control should be investigated or planned on the landscape? So products that help is, if I chase the beetle, do I slow down the growth rate? How much dead volume do I save? Percent of harvest that's gray or green, control costs, harvest dispersal and access costs. So the tool helps determine some of these relationships and answer some of these questions to help decisions being made. The last little piece I want to talk is a little bit just about closing this planning loop. How good are the model predictions? So here is the green is 2010, where the model predicted the new trees would be. The reds are the following year, where did the red trees showed up? And this is from SRD surveys. Dan talked about the different survey methodologies that was used. It creates a lot of problems trying to do this because none of the systems are in place to really track, this is what we predicted, and this is how well we found that happening, or what was observed. Just quickly, these are the 2009 red trees in the central region. These are point locations from the heli GPS surveys, and there's also polygon of, in this area, X% are dead, are red. I just want to show you, as you move through time, you notice FMUs start changing on the amount of information that's available. There's 2009, 2010, 2011. What this reflects is SRD has objectives, and they collect their information in order to meet their 2' objectives that Dan talked about. But if you're sitting right here and you want to know what happens on that piece of ground, because that's where I'm doing my planning, this type of information doesn't necessarily help you get what you need. So from a regional or a corporate perspective on managing where the mountain pine beetle is and making decisions, changes in the process would help that. So a couple of conclusions. The modeling assists with landscape level decisions. Targeted harvesting and individual tree removal, it can slow the mountain pine beetle spread, but they're most effective when combined. It's really critical to generate consistent initial starting conditions, because if you don't know where those beetles are, you can have all the tools in the world, it's not going to help. And that's what I'm hoping to hear more from researchers over the next 2 days, is some insight from some presenters on how fast the beetle grows, under what conditions, and where we might find them.